Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be the mid-year freakout book tag, which I always love doing because it's such a nice check-in point and a way to sort of wrap up the first half of the year's reading in an interesting way and just kind of let you know like what I've been reading aside from my wrap-ups, where there's some more fun questions to answer and some more fun ways to talk about the books that I've read. So just to start off with, to this point in the year I have finished 44 books, which at this stage is pretty good for me. That's definitely at least on par for my average reading year. And I have had a lot of books that I've really loved. I've had a lot of books that are kind of average, and of course there have been a few disappointments. So let's just get into answering the questions. The first question, as always in this tag, is the best book you've read so far in 2024. And I think my answer to this may surprise some of you. I will say that part of this answer is because some of my other absolute favorites have been rereads and some of them have been sequels, which is covered by the next question. But what I'm going to pick for my best book so far of the year is actually Foster by Claire Keegan. And so this is a very, very short book, like 80 to 90 pages, and Foster follows an Irish couple and a young Irish girl who her parents are taking her to live with some of their relatives on a farm for the summer. And the reason is that her parents just don't have the resources to look after all of their children at this point, and their relatives are a childless couple who really love children and have the means to take care of this girl. And so the story is told from the perspective of the girl who's about 9 years old, and there is just so much emotion packed into this short book and so much subtle character work and themes that even though Claire Keegan is writing from the perspective of a child, she still manages to convey to you in such an interesting and effective way that even if the eyes that we're seeing through don't understand what they are seeing, she manages to make it so that you as the reader understand what you're seeing and hearing, and it just hits all the harder for that. So I loved this so much, and I don't want to say any more about it because it is so short, but I would wholeheartedly recommend this. It's heartwarming and heartbreaking, as I said in my favorites of the year video, and it's just such a magical combination. It was so good. My honorable mention for best book of the year so far is The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden, and that is because this is a reread for me, but the Winter Night trilogy are some of my favorite fantasy books ever, and The Girl in the Tower is the second in the trilogy, and it is my favorite of the three of them. Next up, we have the best sequel that you've read so far in 2024, and for me, that has to be The Trouble with Peace by Joe Abercrombie, which is the second book in the Age of Madness trilogy. And so I've spoken about this before in the sense that this trilogy is the third trilogy in his first law series. So difficult to talk about without spoilers, but it just has all of the same things that appeal to me about all of Joe Abercrombie's books, and it actually even has a better plot, in my opinion, than a lot of his books, although I think it's fair to say that in this final trilogy, the plot really does extend over all three books, rather than kind of stopping and starting in each of the individual books, although they do have culminations at the end of each book, but it truly is an overarching storyline. But this is my favorite of the three. I think that it's just so consistent, whereas books 1 and 3 were both also phenomenal, but they had like some maybe slower points or slightly weaker points, whereas I feel like The Trouble with Peace was just top tier all the way through, like no complaints. I love Savine, I love Orso, I love to I don't know, roll my eyes at Leo. I love Ricky. Like, there's so much to love about this book, and this trilogy as a whole definitely stands like head and shoulders as some of my favorite books of the year, but this is definitely a favorite sequel. Then my honorable mention as favorite sequel of the year is Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson, because, you know, this is also a reread, but it is basically one of my favorite fantasy books of all time, so it easily gets that favorite status and that best sequel status. Next up is a new release that you haven't read yet but want to. And I'm just considering this as anything released in the year of 2024 because I am notoriously bad for getting to new releases. So that's just my personal benchmark. But I have 3 answers for this. So we have The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton, which is the most recently released of these books. Then we have Funny Story by Emily Henry. And last but not least, The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden. Question 4 is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year, and honestly, I feel like there's only one answer I can possibly even have for this, which is Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. The entire rationale behind my reread of the Stormlight Archive in the first place, and the conclusion to the first half of the Stormlight Archive arc. I'm so excited for it, but I'm also so nervous for it. Brandon Sanderson is known for sticking the landing on endings, at least so far in his career, but the Stormlight Archive is just a really ambitious series, so I believe in him and I can't wait for the book, but I'm also just a little bit scared. Question number 5 is your biggest disappointment of the year so far, and for me, that answer is unfortunately The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. This is a new release that I was quite excited to read actually because I love the Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo. Now granted, it has been like almost 8 years since I read that series, so I don't know if it's just that my tastes have changed, that I was younger and I fit better with like her YA writing at that time, but I thought that the premise of this sounded really interesting. So we have a main character named Luzia who has magic, but she generally just uses it in very small ways that help her get through the day and make her life a little bit easier. And she is also a woman of Jewish descent living in the Golden Age of Spain, and the Spanish Inquisition is a large threat to basically her existence as a person. And so she does not want to draw attention to herself, but eventually the lady of the household she works in notices her magic and starts to kind of exploit her for dinner parties and like trying to gain social status, and things snowball from there, ending up with Luzia competing for a place as a miracle worker for the king. Now, I think for me, it was the pacing that did it for me in this book, where I just didn't feel tension, I didn't feel build up, I didn't understand the pace of the plot in terms of it seemed incongruous to me. It seemed like things were either going too fast or too slow at any given point. I didn't feel a natural rhythm or like story beats. And I think for that reason, I could just never really get connected. I could never get invested, even though the ideas were interesting and the ideas were good. I just never ended up actually liking this that much, which was genuinely a real disappointment to me because I thought that I would. So that's why this is my biggest disappointment so far. Question 6 is your biggest surprise. And so I always take this to mean biggest surprise in a positive way, which I think is the intent behind the question. And for me, I have chosen Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield because this one, going into it, I didn't really know what to expect. I obviously hoped that I would like it, but I wasn't really sure. It's sort of like a slow literary horror, and that sounds to me like the type of thing that could either really connect with me or could strike me as kind of boring. Like it just depends on the writing, the characters, how everything's working together. But it ended up hitting so well for me. Like I loved this book so much. So the combination with Julia Armfield's writing and her character work and everything, it clearly worked very well for me. I absolutely loved the premise of our main character, Miri, finally getting her wife back after she was lost at sea on an exploratory mission to a deep sea location. And her wife comes back wrong, and Miri's not sure what's wrong with her, only that her wife Leah is different and is sort of devolving into some very strange happenings but we also get a perspective of what Leah and her crewmates were experiencing on their expedition, and the balance of that for me was just perfect. And this isn't really fast-paced or thrilling, but the building of tension and everything up until the conclusion just was perfect for me, and I loved it. So yeah, this was a very pleasant surprise. Question 7 is your favorite new author, which could either be a debut author or a new author to you. And I couldn't pick just one for this, especially since I wanted to give some recognition to some authors with books that I didn't answer any questions with, but were books that I still loved this year so far. So I have Claire Keegan, which is obvious since my best/favorite book of the year, I picked Foster, but I also have Adrian Tchaikovsky because this year I read Guns of the Dawn by him, and I was so impressed by his writing, plotting, characterization, like everything in that fantasy standalone. It can be really difficult to pull off a standalone so well like that, and he just did a phenomenal job, and I'm looking forward to reading more of his writing. And then the third person that I have down for this is Steven Erikson, who is of course the author of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So I have finished Gardens of the Moon, and I am currently reading Dead House Gates. I really enjoyed Gardens of the Moon, and I'm really enjoying Dead House Gates as well. And I think that Steven Erikson just deserves recognition for his writing, like his actual prose. I think it's fantastic. I think he's a very talented writer. And I also think that his talent extends to this entire world and universe that he's building in this series, because it's not only expansive, but it's also deep and detailed and very impressive. So I think he deserves his recognition for that, because I've really been impressed so far. Question 8 is your newest fictional crush, and I don't really get fictional crushes from most of the books that I read. I chose Justin from Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez just because I loved him in the book. I wouldn't necessarily say that I had a crush on him, but I did feel like in that book he was the perfect man, so I did love Justin, and he can be my crush. Question number 9 is your newest favorite character, and there were a few good contenders for this, but I, above all else, I think have to pick Sabine Dan Glokta and Orso Dan Luther from the Age of Magnus trilogy, because they are truly memorable and dynamic, explosive characters that are so fun to follow and so fun to read from, even when they are absolutely horrific. And then the other person that I wanted to recognize here is Emily Marshwick from Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky, because she was an extremely strong character to lead that book, and I loved following her. Question 10 is a book that made you cry, and the one that stands out the most for me for the answer to this is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. At the end of that book had me crying so much, it was unreal. Like, I had to keep stopping reading so that I could dry my eyes or like blink back tears to make sure that I wasn't gonna just start crying uncontrollably and not be able to finish the book. So that one really, really hit me, and I did love that book. Question number 11 is a book that made you happy, and for this one I put down Arrival Most Vile by R.K. Ashwick. So that was one of the SPIFBO 9 finalists that I read for the project that Mel from Melanor Reads was running to read all of the finalists from last year's SPIFBO. And Arrival Most Vile was just sort of a not completely lighthearted, but more on the lighthearted and cozy side of a fantasy romance, and I just really enjoyed myself with that one. It did make me happy while I was reading it. Question number 12 is the most beautiful book you've bought or received this year. And so when it says this year, since I only do this tag in June, I'm just counting it as since the last time I did this, the most beautiful book, because this was technically like a Christmas gift, so it wasn't from 2024 per se, but it definitely wins, so I have to mention it. So the answer is, without a doubt, the Folio Society edition of Jurassic Park, which is literally just, the art is so cool on this book, and it's so well made and beautiful. And it also comes with this like slip case that is, I guess, dinosaur hide or scales or whatever. And this was a gift from Ben. This was kind of cemented as a book that we could have a special edition of because he had read it and also really enjoyed it, and he knew that I loved it. So it was the perfect special edition to add to the collection, and it is being displayed on the shelf. And there's lots of stuff in here that like is really, really cool, like this artwork. That's just one example of some artwork, but there's also stuff in here that is in the original book, like these iterations, but it's just a little bit sharper in this edition, and the fact that it's a newer edition and the computerized like diagrams and stuff just look really nice in this newer edition, and the entire thing is a beautiful book, and I'm so thankful to have it. Then the last question in this tag, number 13, is what books do you need to read by the end of the year? So I've got a few priorities going on. One of them is I need to finish my reread of the Stormlight Archive in preparation for Wind in Truth, which comes out in December. Next thing is I need to read my batch of Spiff Box books in order to pick a semi-finalist for Cassidy from Covers with Cassidy. And then the third thing that I want to do is continue on my current trajectory with Malazan Book of the Fallen. I'm going to read approximately one book every 2 months. So that's kind of my goal. All of those are things that I need/want to accomplish by the end of the year. And I'm on track to do all of them, and I kind of have to do all of them or else other plans are going totally off the rails. So we'll get it done. So that is the last question in this tag, and that is going to be it for this video. So thank you so much for watching. Please chat with me in the comments if you have anything to say about any of these books or authors or whatever have you. I would love to hear from you. Please do like and subscribe if you liked this video and you want to see more from me. And as always, I will have my socials linked in the description if you're interested in any of that stuff. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!